Thestrals, a magical winged horse with a skeletal body, reptilian face, and wide leathery wings like a bat. We know that they have a great sense of direction and are invisible to those who have not seen death. But are they also secretly immortal?
Well, what?
While looking into the possible origins for Thestrals, I noticed that on the Harry Potter wiki there is no classification for their status on mortality. Most magical creatures like unicorns or dragons are classified as mortal beings, while a phoenix would be classified as an immortal being. And then you also have your poltergeists and other creatures like that aren't really alive, so they can't really die, so they would be classified as amortal. Of course, this isn't enough to say that Thestrals are immortal just from that. I'm not Xenophilius Lovegood here. I'm not going to tell you to grab every stone in the world just to prove the resurrection stone doesn't exist, but it did get me thinking, and my first thought was about the Elder Wand, which of course has a Thestral hair for its core. Now, wand lore isn't an exact science. There are plenty of holes with it, like how is Fox's Feathers able to create wands that would pick both Harry and Voldemort while staying brothers? Feels like there are plenty of theories you can make about that one, or, what is the effect depending on what type of dragon you use? Are there any benefits to using a Welsh Green versus a Hungarian Horntail? But one of the few things we do know about wand cores is that when a unicorn hair is used, that over time it will start to become less effective until it eventually becomes useless and needs to be replaced. And it's not like it takes a long time for it to happen either. Bill's wand has a unicorn hair for its core, and he presumably gets it in 1981. And while Ron breaks it in 92 before it can really die, it does seem to be struggling when Ron uses it during his first year in 91. And yes, Ron is a first year in Philosopher's Stone, so how much is it really going to work? But at the same time, Ron struggles with magic his first 2 years, but during Prisoner of Azkaban, when he has a wand that chose him, he does show improvement in his magical abilities, and we all know that he becomes a pretty good wizard too, so at the same time, though, we have to think about, like, why would Bill be giving up his wand? The only times we see characters change their wands during the series is either when they want a more powerful wand, which usually is the Elder Wand, or they need to replace theirs because it broke in some way. Honestly, for Bill, it probably went something like this. Mom, I just got a new job at Gringotts. This is awesome. I think I'm going to buy myself a new wand. What am I doing with this one? I don't know. It doesn't really work right. So, yeah, sure, you can give it to Ron. I don't care. But I'm sure you're asking yourself, what does this have to do with Thestrals? Well, friend, ask yourself this. If a unicorn hair wand will last around 10 years, then how long do you think the Elder Wand would last? The Peverils were alive during the 12th century, so this wand has been performing extraordinary magic that no other wand is capable of for at least 600 years and is still going strong. Harry, this is why we can't have nice things. But this does bring up the question of lifespans for wands and how that's affected by the core. If we're looking at a unicorn hair core as something that can last for around 10 years, and a thestral hair core can last for at least 600, then what about phoenix feathers or dragon heartstring? I mean, phoenixes are immortal beings, so it makes sense that those wands will last forever. Makes a really great deal. I'm sure there are plenty of parents at Ollivanders hoping their kids get one, but what about dragon heartstring? I've already said that dragons are mortal creatures, so is there any kind of problem for that then? Because we never really see a dragon heartstring wand die in the series, whether it's like Hermione's or even McGonagall's, who's been using it for... Yeah, man, that's a weird question from Fantastic Beasts. But she's been using it for a while. But I don't think this is a problem either, because dragons generally live for hundreds of years. Even in Harry Potter, this would be part of the reason why dragon breeding was outlawed in 1709. Because if they have these long lifespans and you have too many of them, then it's easier to be seen by the muggles. So a dragon heartstring wand would still last a very long time, especially when you consider that dragons live for much longer than humans do, even wizards and witches, so I don't think you would ever really have to replace a wand in your life, and the only thing is, they wouldn't truly last forever because while dragons are very magically powerful creatures, they are still mortal, you know? They hatch from eggs, they live, they die. Just, you have to say that it takes about 150 years, give or take a few. Oh man, that joke never gets old. Just like Cedric Diggory. My boy! But there's still more to look at with Thestrals to have them be truly immortal. At this point, we could just be saying that they have a lifespan of hundreds or even thousands of years. There kind of needs to be that next step for them to be truly immortal creatures, and for that, I think we have to look at the Peveril brothers themselves. The Legend of the Deathly Hallows is a story told to children to teach them to stay humble and not go picking fights, but all legends do have a basis in fact, according to Hermione and Professor Binns, and the one line that's always stuck out to me in this legend is that the one who would unite all these hallows will become Master of Death. This line causes a lot of damage to the wizarding world as both Grindelwald and Dumbledore are attracted to it and seek to unite the Hallows, causing a lot of bloodshed along the way. But if we look at the Peverils as real people, then they must have somehow sought to become immortal in their lifetimes or to somehow otherwise defeat death. And if that was their goal, then it seems that at the very least all three brothers were at least inspired by Thestrals. Antioch's is the most obvious because he creates the Elder Wand with a Thestral hair core, and this wand has no equal in the wizarding world as it's able to do things that would otherwise be impossible. Then we have Ignotus, who creates the invisibility cloak, again inspired by the idea of Thestrals being invisible to those who haven't seen death, and most likely using some material of Thestral hairs or something to create the invisibility cloak, which again, isn't a regular one. It's truly infallible, and that's why you would think that it has to have some sort of Thestral hair involved, which also kind of shows just how long Thestral hairs can last again. This time, not just in a wand, but in a cloak, as it's been passed down from generation to generation for at least 600 years, and it also has the added benefit of not drawing the ire of Harry Potter, the boy who destroys things.
Puny god.
But Cadmus creates the Resurrection Stone to bring back those who have already died, but they aren't really back and they don't want to be either. So how does that relate to Thestrals? Well, the first thing it makes me think of is the omen surrounding Thestrals. They're considered unlucky because the only people who could see them have seen death, but at the same time, when you think of an omen like the Grimm as well, where, somebody sees the Grimm and then they die 24 hours later, some people had to have died for that to have become a thing. It's just, people realized it was specious reasoning. It's like if I were to grab a rock or something and then say, hey, I'm protected from tigers, you don't see any tigers around me here.
I want to buy your rock.
So really, the omen around Thestrals really could have started with Cadmus Peveril, who would then see Thestrals after the love of his life had died in front of him, and then especially if he takes his own life after the fact, then people could start to look at it and say, well, it was because of the Thestral, that's what happened. That's why they're unlucky. But if you want to get past the omen of it all, it is still similar between the Resurrection Stone and Thestrals. Obviously you can't see somebody with the Resurrection Stone until they've died, and you can't see Thestrals until you've seen death, and I know it's not really a one-to-one, but it's not dissimilar either, though I suppose you can see the Thestrals clearly when you're seeing somebody through the Resurrection Stone. It's as if you're seeing them through a veil. Huh. That sounds familiar. Yeah, the clips are usually supposed to be funny. Is Sirius's death funny yet?
We are laughing.
You really wreck moments when you do that, Ron.
But right before Sirius's death, Harry and Luna are both able to hear voices coming from the veil, while Ron, Hermione, Ginny, and Neville hear nothing. It's just like how the two of them can see the Thestrals, but the rest of them can't. So, Cadmus seems to have been, at the very least, inspired by the Veil, and while there are many ways the Resurrection Stone could have been created, in my opinion, the most likely ones do involve Thestrals. The most likely is that the Elder Wand had a brother. This wand, actually, which Dumbledore uses in the Fantastic Beasts movies. Man, I wish we could find out if that was true. I know those movies weren't perfect, but I thought they were still good.
It's a bold strategy, Cotton. Let's see if it pays off for him.
Anyway, though, because the way the dead are brought back through the Resurrection Stone is so similar to Priori and Cantatum, this theory would say that Antioch and Cadmus dueled, and because the wands were brothers and both had Thestral hair cores, that they had Priori and Cantatum happen, and that there was a stone that got affected, and that stone became the Resurrection Stone. But the one question that this theory brings up is what happens when different cores have Priori and Cantatum. Obviously, when it's two phoenixes, the dead start to come back, and I think it would make sense for Thestrals to do the same thing as well, but what would happen if it was two unicorn hair wands, or two dragon heartstring wands? Let me know down in the comments what you guys think would happen. Another likely theory is that the Resurrection Stone is like a Bezoar, except with Thestrals instead of goats, and where goats usually represent healing, resilience, and adaptability, Thestrals first and foremost represent death, so that would be why the Resurrection Stone would be able to come as close as you can to bringing people back from the dead, and yet the biggest piece of evidence is when the Hallows are finally brought together, possibly for the first time, or at the very least for the first time in 600 years. Harry becomes the master of the Elder Wand. He's always been the true master of the invisibility cloak, and he's just used the Resurrection Stone to comfort himself so that he can greet death as an old friend. And he survives the killing curse again. Now, of course, this is only against Voldemort. There's a whole lot going on in this battle that makes Harry just completely overpowered against Voldemort and Voldemort alone, but at the end of the day, he still takes on the killing curse and survives. He becomes the master of death with the assistance of 3 magical objects that came from Thestrals. And that is how Thestrals are immortal creatures. How's that for a slice of fried gold? Let me know down in the comments what you think of this theory today, but that's all I got for you guys. So if you enjoyed, please drop a like, subscribe if you want more like this, and I'll see you next time on STV.